I can barely see, but I can kind of see out of my right eye.
You can essentially make sure that they never are able to remove Condemn for the entire game. As soon as they approach a TV, teleport to it. Keep following them, don't actually chase them, you don't have to hit them, you just follow people. And that's the gameplay up.
When it comes to licensed content from Behavior, I rarely find myself excited for its arrival. It has nothing to do with me disliking the characters, nor me having no emotional connections to the licenses added to the game. Instead, has to do with the power designs. Behavior have created a ton of licensed content before in Dead by Daylight, and it has been proven many times that they are very competent at following the license and maintaining the character's likeness. If Behavior made Myers, we would expect them to make him exactly like Myers. They want to add Pinhead, then they will make Pinhead. They want to make Freddie, then they will make Freddie. And then gut him, and then rework him into something else. It is because I know Behavior are willing to follow the character's likeness and iconography that I know exactly what to expect. And it begins to get boring, especially when the only content you do receive is licensed content. With all that said, there was one licensed chapter that did spark some curiosity from me. Not only because it was something I never expected Behavior of attempting to perform, but because of how Behavior were going to handle it. Chapter 23, Sadako Rising, was the most unique licensed chapter I had seen Behavior attempt to add to the game at that point, as Sadako was a rather odd chapter to create. Unlike the licenses of before, which were based on slasher horror icons, Ringu was a Japanese psychological horror, and unlike other horror films where the killer is basking in the spotlight, Sadako is hidden till the movie's ending. Even then, Sadako barely had 10 whole minutes of screen time, and with so little to base the character off of, a question was raised in my mind. How would Behavior implement a character who was quite literally a ghost within her own franchise? Well, the character has been in the game for almost 3 years now, and she is in a state I believe many would agree is fitting for her. The chapter did a lot of homework for implementation, from looking through the original book for inspiration, to utilizing Yoichi as the survivor, who funnily enough has become canon in the Ringu universe. As for Sadako, they feel and play like you would expect Sadako to feel and play. But this version of Sadako took quite a while to get to. She has gone through a lot of changes, different meta playstyles, and through all of these changes, I believe it has inadvertently shown a problem Behavior have that many have only now begun to realize. Now, this is obviously jumping the boat way too far, so let us instead take a step back and look at Onryo, specifically at what she was like on launch. Unlike my previous video in the series, where I looked at Skull Merchant, where her original kit was still fresh in players' minds, Onryo has gone through 2 whole reworks, and has been out of the limelight for some time. As expected, some people wouldn't have known what Onryo was like before the current version she is at now. So, I will be covering each version of Onryo and discussing what happened to result in her getting adjusted. So, let us start with Onryo all the way back on launch day. And before you wonder about it, yes, Onryo's PTB was quite terrible way back then, but so were most characters. Onryo has 2 modes, Manifest and Demanifest. Onryo can swap between the 2 modes, but doing so takes her a 1.5 second channel time, and applies a small slowdown of 3.68 meters per second. Manifest is the simplest of the 2 modes, as this is her average killer mode. She has 115 move speed, a 24 meter terror radius, and can do basic attacks, just like any other killer. It is instead her demanifest mode, where all of her special tricks hide. She starts the trial demanifested, and while in this mode, she cannot basic attack. But you have a few elements to compensate for this downside. While demanifested, instead of having a terror radius, Onryo instead has a 16 meter lullaby. Additionally, Onryo phases in and out of reality, which you can see from looking at her hands. It's similar to Spirit, and how she phases in and out of reality, but unlike Spirit who does it without knowing, Onryo has full knowledge of the fact. When Onryo manifests, she carries on the phasing effect for 1 second. Another element to mention was the fact that Onryo was completely invisible when demanifested if past 24 meters from a survivor, and she lacked collision in the mode, which is pretty cool. Lastly, Onryo can teleport to TV spread across the map, gaining a small boost of move speed for 1.5 seconds. If a survivor is 16 meters near a TV that Onryo teleported to, they are inflicted with a stack of Condemn. Once a survivor reaches 7 stacks, like the movie Onryo comes from, they can be moried out of the match. The TV, however, turns off after Onryo teleported, only reactivating after 100 seconds. These stacks of Condemn are not a complete death sentence, however, as you can grab a VHS tape from any active TV. Taking a VHS tape applies a stack of Condemn, and granted you the ability to gain a full stack of Condemn by turning other TVs off, and doing so puts the TV on a 60-second cooldown. This came at the additional cost of passively building a stack of Condemn within a 25-second window, but you were allowed to insert the tape into a specific TV. It would be highlighted to you while holding the VHS tape, and upon inserting the tape, you not only turn the TV off, but lose 3 stacks of Condemn. This was Onryo 1.0, a killer whose chase potential was low, but made it up with her unique form of map control and her ability to take a survivor out of the match if they ignored the Condemn effects. At first, many wrote her off as a unique but weak killer, and this had to do with her weak anti-loop potential, in addition to her ability to inflict Condemn stacks being limited by lengthy cooldowns, and the VHS tapes being extremely one-sided. This would later change to Onryo having a similar problem to Myers, where players would be confused on placing her strength. At first, many found her to be a weak killer with very little benefits to run, but a unique few found her to be extremely strong when played in a particular way. Before getting into this playstyle, I wish to bring up the player many associate with it, as they were an important source for research on this video, and that is one Pump Willie. He is known by the community as the Onryo main, who would end up discovering a playstyle so controversial for the character, it would lead to a series of multiple changes and reworks. Obviously, I do not wish any ill fortune on Willie. In fact, I believe it should be celebrated that he discovered it first, as it resulted in the character getting changed into a much healthier place much sooner, rather than being ignored till the end of time. Plus, Willie is a goofy little gentleman with a wide assortment of just as silly hats. How can you not like them? Anyways, the playstyle that Willie discovered would be coined many names over the years, from Mass Condemn, Slugako, to even simply Slugging Sadako. I'll go with the different names too, as I feel that each version of Sadako and her unique playstyle was adjusted depending on the iteration. So, for 1.0, I would call it Mass Condemn. This was a playstyle that focused on getting all survivors moried with the Condemn mechanic, and to perform this playstyle, 2 add-ons were utilized, these being the ring drawing and the iridescent videotape. The videotape had the ability to reset 4 TVs you teleported to after landing a basic attack, within 8 seconds of manifestation. Now, it is important to note, you also manifest after teleporting from a TV, so you could easily refresh the TV you teleported to if you landed a hit soon enough. The ring drawing was the rather mean add-on that promoted the slug playstyle of 1.0, as it applied the effects of spreading a stack of Condemn to any survivors who healed a survivor with Condemn stacks. The plan was simple. You teleport from TV to TV, inflicting stacks of Condemn to whoever was in range, and once you found a survivor marked with stacks, you chase and slug them. This would result in the TVs you teleport to being refreshed, and the survivor being left to bleed on the floor. You would then repeat teleporting from TV to TV, inflicting more stacks and going after your next target. If a survivor wanted to pick their teammate back up or fully heal, then ring drawing would inflict the healer with stacks of condemn. The whole point of the slug was not to force players to bleed on the floor, but rather to delay the game long enough for you to gain enough stacks on players to go for a condemn mori. Additionally, because of how ring drawing worked and the power of the videotape, you could increase the condemn stacking speed much faster than without the combo. One Pump Willie did show the playstyle could still be done without the add-on combo, but this was a much more difficult task, as you needed to delay the game even longer to fully obtain enough stacks. Lastly, when it comes to the VHS tapes, you could perform a similar play that Legion 1.0 did, as the VHS tapes did not gain stacks while you were in chase. So, you could moonwalk towards survivors and prevent a chase from starting, causing the tape to passively build up stacks, and you would hold the player hostage from being able to submit a tape, as it took a whole 2-second channel to do so. Now, it is important to note that at first, this playstyle was not impossible to beat. Instead, it was a playstyle that was incredibly pub-stompy, and when played against a team that knew how to handle the playstyle, it would fall apart. This video from Hens333 shows perfectly how the build failed when against a coordinated team, and revealed that the build only worked when against players who ignored the amount of condemned stacks that were placed on them. This would later change, however, with a new meta brewing with the release of the Roots of Dread mid-chapter, as this was the chapter that resulted in the mass condemn build skyrocketing out of control. Along with the generator repair times being increased to 90 seconds, killers now remove 2.5% of total progress from generators per kick. Additionally, overcharge would be reworked to increase passive regression on a generator from 75% to 200% over 30 seconds. And eruption would be buffed to remove 10% progress from marked generators from downs, in addition to inflicting incapacitated for 25 whole seconds. Call Up Brine was a perk released with Sadako. It increased passive regression per kick by 100% on release, which was already run in mass condemn builds to delay the game. In short, the mid-chapter will result in mass condemn having an extremely powerful game delay build, where you could prevent survivors from repairing generators due to incapacitated, while having them regress at 400% speed. Mass Condemn was a build that valued delaying the game down, to allow Sadako the ability to inflict as many stacks as possible, and with this mid-chapter, it was buffed out of control. Even though all these perks would be nerfed later on, it was too late. Sadako was built only around mass slowdown to support the Mass Condemn build, and anyone who attempted to play her outside of the build would still get flamed by players who had endured the playstyle. It's quite similar to another character I talked about before, huh? Anyways, the character clearly needed changes, and behavior agreed, resulting in Sadako being reworked on patch 7.1.0, which funnily enough was when Nicolas Cage was released, as he was a big fan of Sadako and her films. The changes that Sadako needed, however, was a rather confusing situation, as Sadako had adopted two forms of players. Those who enjoyed her map pressure and smart play of manifestation mind game potential, and those who enjoyed the Mass Condemn. Going over that first playstyle. Remember I said Onryo players knew when they were phasing in and out of reality? Well, it ended up changing from a thematic entry for the character to being her unique form of anti-loop. How Onryo players utilized the manifestation mind game trick was by demanifesting and then manifesting again in tiles. They would use the phasing to fake going in one direction, and while invisible, go another direction. It was a unique way to trick players at tiles. And combined with Onryo being a small creature, Onryo players could loop survivors at tiles with smart movement. If I had to describe Onryo 1.0 with a single sentence, it would be a solid concept but a flawed execution. It is clear that players enjoyed what Onryo was bringing to the table, with her thematic Mori mechanic, her smoothness and teleportation, and her unique anti-loop all combined to form a solid concept for a killer design. The problem was that Onryo released during an awkward time for the killer's metagame, in addition to her add-ons promoting one of her playstyles way too much compared to the other elements she brought to the table. It was clear with how varied Onryo was with her player base, that if behavior were going to change Sadako, they were going to need to be very careful on how it was going to be done. I would like to say this is what they did, but considering there was a second rework, it is clear Onryo 2.0 did not do too well. So, as I said with Onryo 1.0, I believed it to be a solid idea with a flawed execution. With that logic, if I were to define Onryo 2.0, it was a character that tossed everything out of the window for the sake of strength, and nothing else. But once again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's cover what changed with Onryo 2.0, as although it may sound small, it changed a lot about Onryo. There was only 2 changes for Manifest and Demanifest, but one was extremely poorly made. The first change was to remove the ability to stun Onryo while demanifested, which remains in Onryo's kit to this day. It has its unique situations, and it is nice, but nothing too crazy. The second change is what Onryo mains got mad at, which was the removal of starting chase while demanifested, and cancelling Bloodlust when swapping between the modes. As I mentioned earlier about Onryo's manifest gameplay trick, this change would end up weakening this gameplay style, as Onryo relied on using the phasing effect to loop at tiles, and the Bloodlust helped in conjunction. Granted, behavior did this to help improve Sadako's stealth, but she already has a 16-meter lullaby, it's not going to help much. This is only the start of the changes for Onryo that her player base disliked, as the next few changes are ones that most of the players greatly disliked. Going over her TV's changes, the ability to turn TVs off were completely scrapped, and the TVs you took a tape from were deactivated for 70 seconds. Additionally, the TVs that Onryo teleported to were only placed on a 45-second cooldown, an incredibly sharp difference between the 100 seconds of before. Now, outside of the change to removing survivors being allowed to turn TVs off, the changes sound decent so far, but behavior decided to do more. Now, Onryo's range on inflicting Condemn was made global, rather than being within 16 meters nearby a TV, but in exchange, Onryo had a 10-second cooldown before being allowed to teleport, and all Condemn stacks gained from teleportation were reduced to a 0.75 stack, rather than a full 1 stack. The VHS tapes were also adjusted too, where now they made you immune to gaining Condemn stacks from teleporting and passive stacks were removed, but if Onryo landed a basic attack on you, the tape was destroyed and you gained 2 stacks of Condemn. Additionally, the tape was destroyed if you were hooked, and instead of having to place the tape into a specific TV to remove the stacks, you could place it in any TV except the one you collected it from. This is a large amount of changes, and obviously it would result in Onryo having a shift in playstyle. The problem is that Onryo shifted in a very strange direction. Behavior wanted Onryo to feel stronger to play, and so they reworked her to be more geared around her Condemn playstyle, which was the playstyle that was the strongest of the 2 I discussed. There was obviously the big elephant in the room with Mass Condemn, and how Onryo players were utilizing it. Unfortunately, their solution was through throwing a mouse in front of the elephant's face. Although the add-ons that caused the Mass Condemn were changed, a few flaws made with the rework would result in Onryo's worst playstyle to date, which I will fully call slugging Sadako. Otzdarva made a video showing off how Onryo 2.0 played, and I will paraphrase what he says was the problem with the new Onryo. Unlike with the previous Onryo, where you had to think of where and when to teleport and realize it would not always result in a full value play, the new Onryo had no punishments to just spamming teleport. Otzdarva played that game with one hand, by the way, and he makes an exceptional point. The catch with Mass Condemn was the fact that you needed to chase survivors to nearby TVs if you knew they had stacks, but survivors could still fake going near a TV and dodge gaining a Condemn stack. Onryo 2.0 lacked this problem, because the range to gain stacks was now global, and unlike before, where you were only applying stacks to the few people inside the TV's range, you could actively go after one player while still applying pressure on the other survivors. Then there was also the fact that players needed to find an active TV and fetch a VHS tape, but this resulted in Onryo players creating a new form of torture that players disliked, and it had to do with the VHS tape. You see, one of the benefits about the old VHS tape was the fact that if you were slugged nearby the TV you needed, you could get picked up and submit the tape, freeing yourself from condemned stacks. The new VHS tapes were very different, because unlike before, where you needed a tape to remove condemn, you now needed the tape to prevent condemn. This became complicated, not only because of the add-on pass with these 4 add-ons making the situation difficult, but due to how the VHS tapes now worked. Similar to before, the reason why she slugged was to delay the game long enough for her to spread condemn. This left the player in a tough situation, as they needed to find an active TV to obtain a VHS tape, resulting in all the survivors picking up a tape once the TVs first activate. This was a great way to suppress Onryo's strength when they played fairly, but not against slugging Sadako. All Onryo players had to do was find a player, smack them, and apply 2 condemn stacks, and then teleport every chance they got. Doing so would build up the VHS tape-free survivors' condemn, and even if their teammates wanted to help, they would be placing themselves at risk of gaining condemn stacks. Additionally, since Onryo has no collision while demanifested, she could walk past a body block if needed. Onryo players would then slug the player down, knowing they were close to full condemn, and proceed to build up other player stacks. If they were picked up, Onryo was given a free kill, and if they weren't picked up, they bled on the floor. Long story short, slugging Sadako was also tunneling, but was performing social distancing at the time. Now obviously Onryo 2.0 did not excite most, as it did not resolve the issues players had, but the big reason why Onryo 2.0 got scrapped for a rework was because it was not just Survivor players who complained about the character, it was the Onryo players too. The big reason why players liked Onryo 1.0 was due to how smooth she felt to play, from her cooldown-free teleport, her smart play with manifestation, and even to how much she needed to plan to go for condemned stacks. Onryo 2.0 was more clunky, as behavior placed her teleport on a cooldown, with the TVs having another cooldown. Her manifestation mind game tricks were weakened with the removal of Bloodlust, Survivor counterplay was dumbed down, and the changes still did not improve her chase power. As for the condemn, it was turned into one of the easiest mechanics for players to use, that anyone could get a condemn kill, resulting in Onryo mains getting mad that their skill expression was removed for making the killer stronger. Then, of course, there was still no solution for slugging Sadako, and if anything, the rework enhanced that problem. Now, a question I am sure many of you are wondering is why did players go for slugs rather than hooks? The big reason why Onryo players did not hook players was because of 2 reasons: time management and cost. Hooking a survivor took time from Onryo players that they could have used to teleport and apply more condemn stacks. In addition, the unhooked changes of base kit borrowed time, with the haste boost being added with the Roots of Dread mid-chapter, resulted in the cost being too much for Onryo with her weak chase power. Why bother giving survivors extra layers of defense, when you could leave them vulnerable to the slug, and still being allowed to build up pressure on other survivors? Additionally, you did not build condemned stacks when hooked or slugged, and considering the 2 options, it is clear Onryo players favored one more. Onryo 2.0 succeeded in making the character stronger, but it resulted in her player base disliking her new direction, her now clunky gameplay flow, and the lack of solutions for the slugging Sadako playstyle. The rework may have failed, but it did teach behavior a good amount of information about what players wanted, and this is where the story turns towards a great direction. Once again, Sadako would be reworked on patch 7.5.0, And the changes you may notice are actually very similar to Onryo 1.0, but with a few alterations. Manifest and Demanifest would start Chase and not cancel Bloodlust once again. In addition, her phasing effect would last an additional 0.2 seconds longer. This was a great change for players who enjoyed her manifestation gameplay style, as they now had extra time to use the phasing effects, in addition to having Bloodlust back at the stronger tiles. As for the TVs, the range of 16 meters was returned, the stacks were adjusted back to 1, and a new visual effect was added to show survivors when they were near the TV's range. There was also another change, which in my opinion was the change that finally removed the slugging playstyle, which was Condemn locking. This was a unique feature that locked in Condemn stacks on survivors after being hooked, maxing at 2 initially, but was later changed to 3 on the hotfix patch. This change was the solution that Condemn players were looking for, as now there was a reason to hook survivors, providing more of a benefit for the cost of before. There was one more change to the TVs involving a power meter, where if you teleported when it wasn't ready, you didn't apply Condemn, but it was removed with the hotfix patch, because behavior realized it was dumb. This is a bit of a side note, but an important thing to mention is when they brought back the TV's range, they did not completely remove the global Condemn. Instead was placed within the bubble of all active TVs. Meaning, unlike before, where you teleported and condemned survivors within that TV's range, you now apply it to any survivor within any active TV's range. A change that I actually really like, as it promotes smart play of which TV you wish to use first. The VHS tapes were also adjusted too, now no longer preventing Condemn from building up, and not being destroyed from taking a damaged state from Onryo. They also brought back the requirements of the furthest TV to remove the tape, and the ability to turn TVs off. Additionally, they reduced the channel time from 2 to 1 second on collecting and depositing the tape. This was done as Onryo players enjoyed running Save the Best for last to interrupt players who were submitting the tape at full HP, which allowed survivors a better chance at survival. Then of course there was another add-on pass, and the only add-on I want to mention is the new improved iridescent videotape, as it was very clear this add-on was made for the players who enjoyed teleporting. This add-on removes Condemn, but now TVs can only deactivate from survivors interacting with it. It is a unique way to change Onryo's gameplay style, to instead focus on map control, rather than on the Condemn, but I really like it. Overall, Onryo 3.0 was considered by many a wild success. Onryo did drop in strength, obviously, but most Onryo players did not care, as she felt a lot smoother to play, and the elements they enjoyed were finally enhanced. The return of the TV's range allowed new forms of skill expression with their new functionality, and the increased time for the manifestation mind game trick allowed better looping play. The hotfix patch only made things even better, not only with the removal of the cooldown, but a reduction to the swapping of the 2 modes to 1 second, with an increased move speed to 4 meters per second with the channel, and the move speed boost from TVs was increased in duration to 2 seconds. The rework has been considered by most overall good, but has this changed over time? Well, Onryo is rarely seen by many these days, as she remains a rather niche killer option, but that was always the case with Onryo since day one. There has been discussions by Onryo mains for small tweaks, such as possibly increasing the Condemn lock to 4, or maybe making Bloody Fingernail even more base kit, but it is only minor alterations they discuss. Overall, the rework has been doing really well, and there isn't much behavior could do, as anything that they could have improved has already been done, except for more add-on changes, as Onryo's add-ons are weird. So this is the end of the story, right? We covered everything about Onryo and her reworks, all the changes, all the infamous build paths, so there's nothing else to discuss. Except, there is one last thing. When I was creating the script for this video, I did a lot of research into the character's changes, and watched many videos on how her playstyles changed from patch to patch. And over time, I began to realize that Onryo's type of rework is not the first to have happened. Now this is crazy, right? After all, BHVR have done a ton of reworks that have been successful, so obviously there will be a rework or two that fails in contrast. But then I noticed a pattern. Of all of the reworks that have been considered a success, they tend to belong to killers with large communities or large amounts of play rates. Now obviously there will be some exceptions, such as Hillbilly 2.0, but in general they have been overall well done. Then there are the reworks that completely failed. That being Trickster, Twins, Freddie, Onryo 2.0, and to an extent, Skull Merchant and Knight. These reworks have been considered by the community as some of the worst changes for their characters, with Trickster only now getting a revert after a year, and Twins' rework that was 2 years in development being mostly scrapped after its PTB cycle. Knight and Skull Merchant are the exceptions of these characters, as Knight's rework was overall good, but BHVR decided to leave him with a base cooldown for over a month, resulting in Jailer or Assassin only playstyles appearing. Then there is Skull Merchant. You already know my thoughts about her rework from my previous video in the series, and the interview I had with the Fake Banette shows my thoughts on her post-mortem. Regardless, I have come up with a theory about these reworks, and that's the fact that BHVR do listen to the community when it comes to balance changes, but they listen to the majority rather than the minority. You see, it is clear BHVR want to please the majority of the player base, and so they will listen to them. But when it comes to killers who belong to a niche audience, it begins to become tricky. Unlike killers like Wraith, Legion, or Ghostface, where most know all the tricks they can pull off, the killers belonging to niche groups tend to have specific nuances to them that most never notice. Onryo is the best example of this, with her manipulation of her phasing effects to the smart play of teleporting at the correct moment to deny the submission of a tape. There are these small moments that the majority of the player base never realize, but the mains of these niche killers do. Unfortunately, when it comes to BHVR reworking their characters, they like to listen to the majority, and it is clear most people refer to Onryo as the condemned killer, and so Onryo 2.0 was born from that. It was only after so many complained that BHVR finally listened to Onryo's player base that they realized the intricate nature of Onryo's varied gameplay style, and so promoted that with the rework. It weakened her, but it made her more fun for both sides. It is why Trickster is getting reverted too, as players have actively disliked the Trickster rework since day one, both survivors and Trickster mains alike. It's unfortunately a problem BHVR have had since Onryo's rework, and I do not believe they have learned from their mistakes yet, as we have seen with their recent changes to killers with niche audiences. Then again, this is just a crackpot theory of mine, and I might just be looking too deep into this, as Onryo has been on my mind for more than 7 days. Huh, so that's what happens when you pass the secret Sadako tape challenge. Well, this is all I really have to say about Onryo and BHVR's attitude towards reworks. The character has gone through a lot of changes, but we have gotten to a point where I believe many can say Onryo plays and feels like Onryo. It took BHVR quite a while to get there, but considering how elusive Sadako as a character is, I understand the struggle. When it comes to the future of everyone's favorite well lady, it seems to be pretty quiet. But you know, I think that's quite alright. I believe Onryo deserves a good amount of rest, especially after all of the excitement she has gone through the almost 3 years of entering the realm. One last thing to note. I would like to thank the Fake Banette and Freddie for helping with proofreading my script. There were a lot of details about Onryo's history that I needed to make sure I managed to nail down, and these two helped to make sure I didn't miss anything specific. So once again, thanks for that. Their links will be in the description below. With all that said and done, I wish you all the best of luck in your games, everyone. You will need it, especially if you hear that dreaded phone call.